Scheduling is one of the biggest problems you're going to face as a dungeon master, and today I have an amazing tip. My best tip of how to overcome the scheduling problem with Dungeons and Dragons. We talk about all kinds of things. We talk about character builds, how to make combat faster, how to make NPCs more compelling. There's tons of ideas and talk about how to make the game of Dungeons and Dragons better, but none of it matters if you don't have a game of Dungeons and Dragons. None of it matters if you don't have a table full of players. I'm going to share my absolute best tip. This was a huge game changer for me, guys, and I'm really excited to finally be sharing this one. Today, I'm going to talk about how to fix your player scheduling problems with what I call a dynamic campaign. Let's get into it. We have all been there. You spent weeks planning this very specific session built around a specific character. Maybe their father, who is believed to be dead, is going to show up with this, essentially be the quest giver or the main NPC for the next session. It's going to be awesome, except a few days before the session, that player canceled. They're not going to be able to make the game. So, you're bummed, but you figure you can scramble. You can take a little bit of this over here, you can stretch this out, you can change some things up, you can throw in this other idea you have. You can put together a session, and you could save this big reveal for the next session when that player will be there. And so you scramble, you have a few days, you make it happen, you come up with a different adventure idea, you're good to go. And then 3 hours before the game, you have a second player cancel. Now you've got 2 out of 5 players missing. Your heart sinks. This game that you were so excited about a few days ago, now you have a sinking feeling about it. Now you have this feeling of responsibility and dread. You kind of feel like you're up there in front of your class in 6th grade having to give some report in front of everybody. You know, you have that feeling of like, oh, I'm dreading this. I don't really want to do this. It's a very common feeling when your players cancel out on you, especially when you've done a lot of work to make the game happen with little details around their characters. And now you've got 3 out of 5 players, and you've got to come up with something else. You've got to modify your idea yet again. 3 hours, 2 hours before game time. This is a time where you should be relaxing, just checking over your notes, just getting your blood pressure down, getting in your headspace. But now you got to go back into creator mode. You got to start adjusting. And you're starting to have a feeling that, like, even if I do this, another player could just cancel, like, in the last hour. In fact, the person to cancel might be you. You're not having fun anymore. And, you know, I have had this feeling. I have been the one who canceled because of other people canceling. And really, scheduling, guys, is the big bugbear in Dungeons and Dragons. It is the big thing that every dungeon master has to overcome before they can really spread their wings and actually play the game, actually have an entire successful campaign, actually play the game over and over with a solid group of players. Scheduling is huge, and it is something that plagues all of us dungeon masters. And I'm going to kind of propose my idea, my fix, which changed things for me. Kind of a radical idea, and that is that you as the dungeon master, it is your responsibility to keep your games going, to make them regular and to make them solid. You might have players in your group that have the best of intentions, but they're just very busy people and things come up. You might also have players in your group that are just flaky, and it's up to you to decide how you want to do that. I wouldn't want a lot of flaky players constantly raining on my parade. But the point is, no matter what the situation is, no matter what the reason for player absences is, you as the dungeon master have the power to keep your game going. And that is what a dynamic campaign is all about. I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. It's how I make my living. I play 6 or 7 games a week, and these games are your typical kind of campaign, the same group of players playing the same characters, moving through a continuing storyline. But I have one very special game that I play just about every week, and sometimes a couple times a week. This is a dynamic campaign. This idea I want to share with you. My game, my dynamic campaign, is called The Keep Beside the Chasm. Kind of based on a simple concept, a dungeon complex that has been discovered near the player's hometown. A sprawling labyrinth of crypts and laboratories built long ago. It's mysterious. No one knows who built it. No one knows why it's there. And an equally mysterious group of benefactors is paying adventurers to explore and clear these dungeons out room by room and level by level. Now, The Keep Beside the Chasm is different than my other weekly campaigns because any of my players are allowed to join up for the weekly session. Moreover, I advertise this game on startplaying.com, so I often get players that I've never even played with before. There's usually one or two in any given session who sign up for The Keep to join it as kind of a one-shot adventure. And I always run it with 6 people. That's kind of where I cap it. So whatever 6 adventurers sign up for this game first, that is the team that is going in that week into The Keep Beside the Chasm. The cool thing about this particular campaign, each one is a bit like a one-shot, but it's a little bit different because the actions that one group does within this dungeon complex change it. They affect it for all future groups. If one group clears out rooms 3, 7, and 8, those rooms are cleared out when the next group comes through. If Expedition 47 awoke a Glabrezu demon and had to run for their lives, then Expedition 48 and everyone onward might have to deal with that demon that's been released in the dungeon. And so, Keep Beside the Chasm, it is a continuing campaign, yet it doesn't matter who shows up week to week. And that's kind of, that's what I'm getting at. A powerful way that I'm able to use this in my campaigns is that if I have one of my weekly campaigns and a couple people can't make it, and it just doesn't make sense to run that storyline, I have a game dynamic and kind of an in-world story element that allows people in any campaign to get teleported into the Keep Beside the Chasm. It's kind of this concept that I built that actually makes sense within the game world to where all the players from various campaigns can show up there and it makes sense. And in this way, if I have a few players that can't make it, I can put it out to the group, hey, we're going to cancel our regularly scheduled session, but you guys can still go to the Keep Beside the Chasm. You can do some dungeon crawling. Furthermore, I put the word out to all my players. I usually have the game fill up, so we get some players from other campaigns who get to hang out with, some of the other players from different campaigns. I usually have a completely new person in. I have players that they will join the weekly Keep Beside the Chasm campaign. They'll join it like a one-shot, but they'll keep coming back with the same character. They don't even end up in any of my campaigns, yet they play in the Keep every other week, every 2 weeks, maybe even every as much as they can. And it just creates this really cool, fun dynamic that allows me to keep my games going no matter what. Because, again, if I have to cancel a regular campaign, I just switch over to a Keep game. The beauty of it is that this Keep campaign, this dynamic campaign that I have off to the side, it is a ready source of adventure. I've got different levels to it. I have some of the levels and rooms, the monsters, the encounters. They're really fleshed out. It was all stuff that I built ahead of time. Some of it's very free flow, so I can be creative. And some of it I don't have fleshed out at the deeper levels, but I kind of have a vague idea what's there. So I can very quickly whip up one of these dungeon crawl sessions, and they just lend themselves to being ready to go quickly. They lend themselves to being fun no matter who shows up. And that's the thing. It is the no matter who shows up aspect of a dynamic campaign which allows me to schedule proof my games. So that's kind of the general gist of a dynamic campaign. I'll get into some of the details of it now. So what are the building blocks of a dynamic campaign? I'm going to kind of go through the big ones, but first, guys, if you like what I'm doing here, please drop me a like or a subscribe. I could really use the support. Also, I would like to hear, this is not in a sadistic way, but I would love to hear sort of your scheduling nightmares and maybe how you as a DM or how your DM fixed the problem. I'd love to kind of hear that down below in the comments if you guys have some good stories or insights about scheduling problems, scheduling nightmares with Dungeons & Dragons. Now, on to the dynamic campaign. The first aspect of a dynamic campaign that is most important, and I kind of touched on this at the end of the last little segment here, is the fact that it does not matter who shows up. A dynamic campaign is constructed in such a way that whether you have 2 players show up or 6 players show up, it'll still run reasonably well. Whether there's a wizard in the party, whether there's not, if there's a healer, if there's not, and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be the same set of people. There's nothing about the dynamic campaign. There's nothing in the storyline that is hinging on a specific character being there. So there's no disappointments or problems or backflips that you have to do if a specific person doesn't show up or if an unexpected person does. So dynamic campaigns, I would say the first aspect of them is that they are flexible. Again, meaning it doesn't matter how many players or which ones show up, the idea will still work. Now, the second aspect of a dynamic campaign is that the sessions are episodic, meaning that if you have a 3-hour session, it's going to have a start, a middle, and a satisfying ending. Now, you could still end on sort of a cliffhanger, or you could end with a mystery, with something left unsolved. But the point is that with a dynamic campaign session, where you end, it's not going to matter if on the next campaign, if none of those players even show up. You can still move the story forward in a different way because the little mini story arc that was planned for that session wraps up. For instance, in my dynamic campaign, The Keep Beside the Chasm, I might have a particular session plan where the group has to sneak down into an ancient library and recover a book that is bound in red velvet with a green emerald on the cover. And so they sneak down into this library. They have to search through it. They have to deal with a few ghosts. And then at the end, a devil that was trapped there long ago to protect the library might spring up. And that's the adventure idea. Go to the library, fight, RP with a few ghosts, search through some books, big boss shows up, battle, they get the book, wrap. Story over. That session is over. And so it doesn't matter who shows up next week. Nothing is left hanging in an unsatisfying way. It's a succinct, complete mission that can be completed in whatever your session time is. If you're playing in real life, you might run longer sessions, maybe 5-hour sessions. I tend to run 3-hour sessions when I'm playing online because that seems to be like the kind of the perfect level of player and DM attention to get like a good session. So yeah, episodic in nature. There's a start and there's an end to each session that wraps up in a satisfying way. Now, number 3 aspect of a dynamic campaign, and this is what really makes it fun and interesting, is that a dynamic campaign is serial in nature, not like Captain Crunch, but like serial as in there's a timeline to it. And there is a, how do I say this? It's like whatever happens in session 1 is actually relevant for the future of the campaign. It might not be directly relevant to the next session or the next 5 sessions, but it happened. If the players in the first expedition into the campaign discovered a new level, that level becomes knowledge that the second group in the second session will know about. It might change things. Discoveries made, monsters defeated, treasures discovered, traps sprung, bodies left lying on the floor, chalk messages scribed, beholder this way, enter at your own risk. Anything that the players in one session leave behind or do or accomplish, it goes on the records. It's relevant. It's history, and all the artifacts and physical evidence of that remain behind. In my dynamic campaign, The Keep Beside the Chasm, the bodies lay there, the treasures get raided before other groups have a chance to show up and get them. New things are discovered, new bosses and bad guys and NPCs come to light from different groups. And it's cool because players in different campaigns communicate with each other about what they've discovered. I have little notes about some of the discoveries that make it into the campaign that anybody can read, these little discoveries that different groups make that become common knowledge. And so you have this really cool ecosystem of it's almost like a combination of a campaign and a one-shot. It's a one-shot in the sense that it's open close, one session, and it doesn't matter if the same group of players shows up again for the next session, but it's a campaign in the sense that all the sessions are centered around the same location, the same event, and whatever happens in one session continues to affect all the future sessions. It becomes canon. It becomes what happened. So, ideas for dynamic campaigns. I'm going to share a couple ways I think you can really incorporate this into your game. One thing is, a dynamic campaign can stand alone all by itself. If you have a lot of players that are kind of interested in playing, but you don't have a lot of dedicated players yet, you can create a dynamic campaign. You can create a campaign that sort of build out a location. You make it flexible to where whoever shows up, you're ready to go with a session. It's serial, you're going to take notes about what happened, and you're actually going to make little changes to the dungeon or the adventure structure for the future based upon what happened. And you build this out, and you could just run a campaign like this all on its own, just a dynamic campaign all on its own to schedule proof your game. But where the real power comes in is where you take a dynamic campaign and you put it on top of your regular campaign, where you use it as a stand-in for when the regular campaign, certain players can't make it, or maybe you just need a break from the regular storyline, and so you can divert the players into this dynamic campaign, which is existing side by side with all of your regular campaigns. So I'm going to talk about some ideas about how to do that right now. Okay, guys, this is the really good part. How to take a dynamic campaign, interweave it with your regular campaign in order to not only make your campaign schedule proof, but to create this little fun, interesting thing off to the side. Now, think of a dynamic campaign as a side story. It is a side story arc that doesn't affect your main story arc. It sits off to the side, it's always there, and it's always a potential source of adventure, but it never has to be acted upon. That's one of the sort of key ideas of a dynamic campaign. Here's an example. You're a group of adventurers. You're doing your own thing. You have your own story, your own campaign arc, but you are also a hired sort of a subcontractor for a mysterious group called the Night Watchmen. When things go bump in the night, you bump back. The Night Watchmen look for evidence of monsters like lycanthropes, ghosts, and other terrifying things infiltrating the outskirts and then the underbelly of whatever city or town that your main campaign is based in. They look for evidence of monster incursion. When they find it, they do research on the monsters. Finally, they track them to their lairs, and then they arrange for a good old-fashioned monster hunt. Now, this idea of your adventurers being part of this side group that they can participate in when they want to. They're like subcontractors. So this kind of adventure idea is always off to the side. And what you do with a dynamic campaign is you put in a little hard work at the beginning, and you flesh out the idea and you flesh out some adventures. So say with this Night Watchman idea, immediately I need a boss. I need a leader of the Night Watchmen. So I make up Constable Johnston, and I find a cool picture for him. I give him a personality. I work up some thing, and then Constable Johnston has a mysterious wizard named Ezrin, and so I find a cool picture of Ezrin. He's a drow wizard. He's always kind of cloaked and in the background, doesn't talk much. And so I kind of flesh out the staff of the Night Watchmen, the sort of contact the handlers that interact with the players, that become the quest givers. And then I come up with a few quests. I come up with, there's 3 trolls that are living under the town square that have been crawling out of the well at night. First, people's dogs and cats started disappearing, and then people started disappearing. So I create a little troll lair. And maybe I have a house that is haunted by several specters and a wraith. And so I find a map of a house, and I kind of like come up with this short little adventure idea. And I populate 3 or 4 things like that so that they're kind of ready to go, and all my periphery stuff. So now I have this dynamic campaign of the Night Watchmen off to the side of my regular campaign. And whenever my regular campaign can't progress because 2 of the players have to call out, I tell the other players, no, we're going. We're gonna keep playing. Don't worry about it. I've got something. And you do. It's already ready to go. You make a few tweaks, maybe based on who's going to be there, if you feel like you need to do that. And then you start off the adventurer with whoever was able to show it. They are in the tavern. They're thinking about their next quest. They have some downtime, and the captain sends them a note. Come at once. Your services are needed. And that becomes this cool little side adventure. And what's cool about it is that your campaign characters, the ones that showed up, are going to have this cool story about some stuff they did and some discoveries they made when the next week, when your campaign progresses as normal. And over the course of your campaign, different combinations of players are going to work with the Night Watchmen to hunt different monsters. And so your players, you're gonna have these cool, interesting sessions where maybe only 2 people get to have a duo adventure, or just an odd combinations of different players with outside players. You might have you might have a cousin or a brother-in-law or a nephew that has always wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons. Your regular session has to cancel. You're going to do your dynamic campaign, your Night Watchmen. They're going to hunt those trolls. They're going to hunt those trolls this time. There's only 2 people that are showing up, so you call your cousin, or you call someone in a different campaign. You get some people together. You get an odd squad along with your regular players, and you have this amazing adventurer with a different group of people. Different bonds, different ideas, different interaction between these different characters that normally wouldn't be part of the campaign. They get to dip their toe in and have these cool little story moments off to the side. And as you progress through the campaign, as maybe you play the first Watchmen session, and maybe a year or 2 into the campaign, you've played 20 of these things. and it's starting to develop a whole story and mystery and history of its own. You might even have some players who started as pinch hitters for you, who just came in to play a one-off session in one of these side games, who fit so well, who loved it so much that now it's become like a funnel to get people into your regular campaign. Um, there's so many cool ways and that this can work. There's so many cool things you can do with it. I did kind of say it is important to keep it so that it doesn't affect your normal campaign. It's important to keep it siloed somewhat, but at the same time, it is really interesting if you also use it to seed little story elements that are going to be relevant in the main campaign, to drop clues about the main campaign, to introduce NPCs that are going to show up later on in the main campaign. You can go wild with this thing. You can use this dynamic campaign on the side of your regular campaign to really deepen the story, to introduce information from an out of left field perspective, from a different place. You can do a ton with this thing. Another example of a dynamic campaign, the Harpers. Your group, they've all become members of the Harpers. As Harper agents, they are essentially allowed a great deal of autonomy to do whatever it is they want. But occasionally, when you have a few players call out, the Harpers, their handler, will contact the group with a side mission. And so you develop some things. You create a few Harpers. You find pictures for them, come up with personalities and stuff like that. You create the group handler and maybe a few NPC allies that can show up for those situations where maybe you do only have two players show up and you can't get anyone else in. So you drop a few NPCs in to keep your encounters balanced and keep it going like that. You build that stuff out, and then you build a few adventurers. You come up with an outcast wizard who has turned to banditry and stolen a valuable magical item from a local temple, and the Harpers want that guy rounded up. So you create that bad guy, you create where he's hiding out, you have that adventure ready. The Harpers have heard about strange lights being seen in a ruin north of town. You come up with that side adventure. You build this stuff out. The dynamic campaign does add a little bit of work to your plate, but if you just build out 3 or 4 ideas ahead of time, you keep them relatively loose, it's really not that much. It's really not that hard for the mileage you guys will get out of this. Another example is my example, a good old-fashioned dungeon beneath the city that needs to be cleared out kind of thing. Your classic Keep Beside the Chasm was inspired by Undermountain, and the Yawning Portal, and just taking Undermountain, you could take that entire adventure and that's your dynamic campaign. That's your thing on the side that the players can always do if a few people cancel out and it kind of ruins the main storyline. This brings me to a couple of tips about dynamic campaigns. First off, remember that you can use these things to introduce ideas, characters, concepts that are going to be important later in the main campaign. You can use these dynamic campaigns when you have maybe a smaller group of players and it's a little more intimate. You can introduce some ideas, some rumors. You can use the dynamic campaign to do that. Secondly, you want your dynamic campaign to help you and not become a headache. So I highly suggest that if you're going to homebrew it like I did, I highly suggest that you do it ahead of time. You get ahead of yourself. For me, with the Keep Beside the Chasm, I had an entire level fleshed out and a few ideas about the lower levels. I also sort of had a lot of background story stuff. I didn't have the whole thing built before I went for it, but I had a lot of it built. so that it wasn't it wasn't like a headache to run it. It was ready to go. That's one of the main aspects of these dynamic campaigns. They're off to the side and they're ready to go. So a big tip that I would give is to use pre-published stuff. There are lots of awesome dungeon locations in the various adventures. Okay, this one for instance has amazing giant layers in it. That might not work for your dynamic campaign, but the point is, there's a lot of locations and little ideas as part of other campaigns and adventures that you could just pluck out of there and find ways to use in your dynamic campaign. I mentioned Undermountain is it's an already built huge dungeon crawl that you could use. You don't have to call it Undermountain. You can change the names and places to suit your campaign world. But yeah, just the second tip: harvest stuff that's already out there. Don't feel ashamed to run something somebody else created, especially with your dynamic campaign. This is supposed to be an easy and powerful hack for you as a dungeon master, not this huge burden that's on your plate. So you want to go with something that you can run easily. The next thing I would say about your dynamic campaign is, you can keep it very simple, but you can also go very deep with it. It just comes down to how much time you have. You definitely don't want to overburden yourself, but for me, like just as a for instance, with the Keep Beside the Chasm, there are tons of mysteries and NPCs and sort of weird secrets to be learned. The good thing about all this weird stuff and this detail is that it doesn't matter so much if the players pursue those things. On the surface, it's a dungeon crawl, it's a monster mash, it is a creep and a fight through a very strange kind of winding, seemingly never-ending environment. It's a fun time. But for players that want to look a little bit deeper, there are tons of secrets and little discoveries peppered in there. And so it suits the hack and slasher, and it also suits the thinker. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun for whoever shows up. It's just, and getting back to these, getting back to the last tip, the Monster Hunter idea, the Agent of the Harpers idea, the classic dungeon crawl idea. The great thing about ideas like this, why they make great dynamic campaigns, is because they have just a broad, fun appeal. What adventurer isn't going to enjoy and be intrigued by a monster hunt? What adventurer isn't going to enjoy a good dungeon crawl every now and then? So anyways, guys, tell me about a time. I would like to hear from you guys. Does your dungeon master, or do you as a dungeon master, do you ever create side quests when you have player cancellations? Or do you just trudge through the story? Like, how do you handle player cancellations? How do you get around it? How do you keep the momentum of your campaigns up? For me, the most exciting thing about the dynamic campaign is that it circles back to the realization that I brought out earlier, that it's really the dungeon master's responsibility to keep their games regular and consistent. What a dynamic campaign does for me is it gives me a go-to when my main plan falls through. And what that means for me is that I'm a consistent dungeon master. I don't get disheartened and cancel games. I always have a backup plan, and players see that. And ultimately, while you will have some flaky players, and there's not much you can do about that, and you will have overly busy players who can't commit as much as maybe they should for a real campaign, and you can't do much about that, you can be consistent. And with your consistency over time, you will not only attract consistent players, but players who are a little bit less consistent will see how serious you are, and they'll shape up a bit. So, hope that helps, guys.